No, it's good with me. Not snow yet. Your guess is as good as mine. No. It makes it easy.
Oh.
Is this my seat?
That's your seat.
Bonjour.
We ready? Okay, thank you. Okay, so good morning, welcome. It's very nice to see some familiar faces here. Thank you for joining, and I'd like to send a warm welcome to everyone in the room and many of you who are online. A very warm welcome here. And whether you're in this country or overseas, I know we have a number of people from abroad who have dialed in. My name's Mark Arena. I am the Director of Communications here for the Church of England. Once again, a very warm welcome. If you've covered the General Synod before, you'll know we usually have a press conference a few weeks before a meeting of Synod, when the papers for the various debates and pieces of legislation are published. Today is a bit different and an important day in the history of the Church of England, because we are pleased to publish the outcome of a special period of prayer, discernment, and decision-making involving all of the bishops. Today, we are announcing the culmination of a process of listening and learning across the whole of the Church of England about questions of identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage, stretching back over almost 6 years. The process was called Living in Love and Faith. We're delighted to be joined today by the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, who for the last 2.5 years has been leading a group of bishops called the Next Steps Group, which led a process of church-wide listening and discernment. With Bishop Sarah is Dr. Ava John, the coordinator of the Living in Love and Faith process throughout the last 6 years. You'll also hear from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell. And in just a moment, you'll hear from William Nye, the Secretary General of the General Synod. As you all know, Synod usually meets 2 or 3 times a year, once in London in February, once in York in July, and in some years back in London again in November. Our next group of sessions will be in London, meeting from February the 6th to the 9th at Church House, Westminster, just across the river from where we are this morning. By now, hopefully, you will have received a batch of papers by email about an hour ago. Those are also being sent to members of Synod this morning, and all will be published on the Synod page of the Church of England website. In fact, they've been published a few moments ago. Don't be too alarmed. It's a large pile of papers. Don't be too alarmed by the volume. We should be able to help you navigate those this morning. The key is just a little tip, is to look at the agenda, which is paper GS 2283, that's GS 2283, which sets out the timetable for discussions and also details important other details, such as the exact wording of the proposed motions. So before we look in detail at the Living in Love and Faith prayers and resources, I'd like to invite William to give us a brief overview of what else is coming up at Synod.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for coming. We have rather more interest in our press conference than some years, so there may be some newcomers or people unfamiliar with the work of the General Synod. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to the Synod's work and to the business the Synod will be doing at the forthcoming group of sessions from February the 6th to the 9th. I do realise, of course, that most of you will be most interested to hear from Bishop Sarah and the Archbishops, about the Bishop's response to living in love and faith. So I do promise to be very brief before handing over to them to deal with that part of the agenda. The General Synod is the Church of England's national legislative and deliberative body. It is sometimes called the Church's Parliament, and it does resemble Parliament in that its principal business is to legislate, that is, to make law for the Church, which is, because the Church of England is an established church, also part of the law of the land. The Synod will devote quite a bit of time in February to this primary law-making function. Parliament has devolved to the Synod the power to legislate for the Church, subject to a procedure which takes our draft measures, the equivalent of parliamentary bills, back through the Houses of Commons and Lords once they have been approved in the Synod. And the Synod comprises three houses: bishops, clergy and laity, the clergy and laity elected from the dioceses of the Church. The main elements of business next month will be living in love and faith, obviously, which you'll hear about in a moment, but also three other kinds of business. First, the legislation, including on matters like safeguarding, where we are implementing one of the recommendations of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, church pensions, church finance, enabling wealthier dioceses to help poorer dioceses financially, and fees, setting the standard fees for weddings and funeral services. Secondly, dealing with matters of wider public interest. For example, we have a debate on the cost of living and how the Church is helping and can help people affected. And we have a debate on the rate of insurance premium tax. And we will be inviting the Synod to present a loyal address to His Majesty the King. And thirdly, business relating to the Church itself, but without legislation. Living in love and faith falls into this category. But we also have a debate on proposals to simplify the governance of our national church functions, a debate on reforming how we pay for the training of clergy, and a presentation and debate about progress on safeguarding. This also includes some standard bits of Synod business, notably the Synod question time session, when members of Synod can ask questions of various bodies in the Church. I imagine that most of you will want to move on to hear about LLF, but before we do that, I would be happy to try to deal with any questions you may have about the rest of the agenda.
Are there any questions for William? William will be around a little later on if you have any questions about the operation of Synod. Happy to go through those. Let me now turn our attention to LLF. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, to talk about LLF.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for coming. It's good to be with you, and also those online. We're glad that you could join us. As Mark said, my name is Sarah Mullally, and I've chaired the Next Steps group over the last 2.5 years. The Next Steps group is made up of bishops from the Church of England, and we've been steering this process. But in doing that, we have been accompanied by a reference group, which are people with diverse lived experiences and convictions. Back in 2017, the Archbishops, the House and the House of Bishops commissioned a major study of human identity, sexuality, relationships and marriage in the context of the Christian faith, changes in society and the disagreements within not just the wider church, but the Church of England. The result was a suite of teaching and learning resource, which was published in November 2020 under the banner of Living in Love and Faith. And I'm very pleased to see that the Archbishop of Canterbury's copy is very well thumbed. The teaching and learning resources were designed to be accessible. They included not just the book, but also a video-based course. There were films and there were podcasts. They told stories of individual couples and families with diverse lived experiences and convictions about sexuality, identity and relationships. During 2021 and 2022, the bishops encouraged church communities around the country to use the resources to learn together, to listen to one another and also to God. Thousands of people took part. In fact, over 6,000 people responded to a questionnaire about the experience of learning together. Many sent poems and artwork in response to the topics that they explored. This was the first church-wide process of this type in the Church of England. We, the bishops, also played our part in Living in Love and Faith. We were involved in drafting the book. We encouraged people in our diocese to take part in the LLF course, and we engaged with the resources ourselves, alongside studying scripture and reflecting on the church's tradition. We then listened to what people said, the things that they said about the matters in living in love and faith and the issues that raised. Towards the end of last year and earlier this week, the bishops have been meeting together to discern what we believe God is saying to the church. We are accompanied in this process by 12 people, again representing the diverse lived experiences and convictions, who provided a non-episcopal, in a sense, what we're really saying, they weren't bishops, and they provided their perspective and held us to account in that process. And we are very grateful for what they offered to us, recognising that for some it also cost them. Together, the bishops have studied the scriptures, we have paid attention to the church tradition, and we have listened to wider society, as well as the voices of our sister churches in the Anglican Communion and our ecumenical partners. Above all, we have sought the wisdom of the Holy Spirit in prayer and worship. The differences within the Church of England are also present among the bishops of the Church of England. Engaging with Living in Love and Faith process has enabled us to become more open and honest with each other. That has been an important part of the process, which means, and I think has given us a greater understanding of what it means to be living together as members of the body of Christ. Being honest has not erased our disagreements, but it has deepened our relationship and our desire to continue to work with one another, seeking the deeper unity for the church for which Christ prayed for. Some clear developments have emerged from our discussions that in fact are a series of firsts for the Church of England. In an open letter, we together apologise for the pain, hostility, exclusion and rejection that LGBTQI people have experienced within the church. We realise that this behaviour has not reflected the universal love of God for all people. We know that we need to change. And Archbishop Stephen will speak more on this shortly. In our letter, because we write a letter to the church, we express our joyful affirmation and celebration of LGBTQI people in our church communities. And we have begun to produce a suite of prayers. These prayers are known as prayers of love and faith. They mean that same-sex couples who are faithful and seek a lifelong relationship will be able to come into churches in the Church of England for prayers of dedication, thanksgiving, and of God's blessing after, for example, coming to a significant point of their relationship or entering a civil partnership or marriage. For the first time, the churches within the Church of England will be able to do this. This is a real first. Up until now, same-sex couples have had no way of publicly expressing their desire to put God at the centre of their relationship and commitment to one another in a Church of England church. These prayers can be used flexibly for relationships at different stages and in different contexts. Services that use these prayers are not marriage services, and their use by clergy is entirely voluntary. This means that the church can continue to embrace the different perspectives that are held by clergy and congregations within the Church of England about same-sex marriage and same-sex relationships. We realise that for some this will be deeply disappointing, particularly for those who long for equal marriage for same-sex couples. We also realise that for others among us, there will be a deep concern that the prayers of love and faith will go too far. Your consciences and theological convictions will not allow you to use them. Any discussion around identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage involved deeply held convictions across the spectrum of lived experiences and theological understanding. People's personal identities and interpretation of scriptures are caught up in this process. It is inevitable that from a wide range of perspectives, there will be many feelings, which may include vulnerability, fear, sadness, resignation, anger, as well as joy and hope. Along with this, we live in a society in which we often are pressured towards adversarial behaviour. As God's church, we are called to a different way. By being honest about our own disagreements and through gracious interpretation of doctrine, we will honour the reality of our differences within the Church of England and across the Anglican Union and among our ecumenical partners. We hope to model this by providing prayers that bear a nuance of variety and of understanding. This is not about enforcing unity, but it is about pursuing it by the grace of God. What we must do is create gracious space for the Holy Spirit to fill as we stay faithful to Jesus Christ, rooted and grounded in the love of God. Thank you. I'm now going to pass over to Ava, who will talk more about the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Sarah, and thank you for your interest and for coming today. It has been, I must say, my privilege to serve the Living in Love and Faith process over the last 5 or so years. So, what has changed? What's different now? What will it look like for LGBTQI+ people and for churches around the country? We have published a draft set of prayers of love and faith. These resources contain prayers, Bible readings, and other resources that can be used within a service that celebrates a committed relationship between two people. So a same-sex couple who may have entered a civil partnership or marriage will have a conversation with a clergy person. Together, they will look at the resources in the prayers of love and faith and create a personalized service in which they can celebrate their relationship, give thanks to God, and receive prayers of God's blessing on them. The prayers here in these resources include a prayer of dedication, for example, of commitment, of thanksgiving for the gift of love, and for God's blessing on a couple. They include prayers that may be said with or by the couple. The resource also suggests suitable Bible readings and gives some examples of how a service using these prayers might be put together so that it is truly personalized for the couple. A service could, in fact, include a prayer as a couple make their home together. So this is a major change for the Church of England, and our hope is that it will enable the Church, together with the family and friends of the couple, to joyfully affirm and celebrate their love and their commitment and faithfulness to one another before God. But living in love and faith is about much more than same-sex relationships. Its strapline is human identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage. So as important as the question of same-sex relationships is, and it is important, a number of other things have been put forward by the bishops. So, for example, they have announced their plan to create a new suite of pastoral guidance that will replace guidance that is no longer fit for purpose, called Issues in Human Sexuality, written over 30 years ago. This guidance will help churches to better carry out their responsibility to offer pastoral care to all people in their parishes in a genuinely inclusive way. It will also help the Church in its discernment and expectations of people who might be wishing to explore a ministerial vocation in the Church. One of the aims of the Living in Love and Faith project was to enable the Church to better live out its calling in the context of a 21st century understanding of being human and being sexual. Both the church and wider society are faced with new challenges that concern human identity and relationships. These include, for example, our need to reflect on what it means to be embodied human beings in an increasingly virtual world, and in a world where the concept of gender, for example, has become fluid. We also live in a society with a growing number of single people, both young and old. Human beings are created to be in relationship. Relationships are the stuff of everyday human life and flourishing. So how do we express and enact genuine welcome and acceptance that enables the flourishing of the diversity of people and relationships that form the everyday lives of people in our communities? That is what the church is called to. So how do we speak into this, the wisdom of Christian understanding and of God's goodwill to all people? These are some of the areas that bishops agree the church needs to attend to in an exploratory, participatory, and inclusive way. So much has happened, but much work still to do.
Thank you very much, Eva. We will be taking questions in the second half of the press conference, but I would now like to ask Archbishop Justin for his personal reflections.
Just to put this slightly into historical context, questions around sexuality, relationships, and marriage have been debated by all global churches for a very long time, certainly 40 or 50 years. In the Church of England, we've been looking seriously at this, and there have been resolutions at General Synod and papers and discussions since the 1970s. But that has picked up a lot in the last 10 years as culture has changed very rapidly in our society. And I really want to say these are not academic debates or theological debates. As Eva and Sarah have commented, this is about the lived experience of normal human beings every day with those they love and who love them, and working out how to do that. What works, what's right and wrong. And very often, and Archbishop Stephen will say something about this in a moment, very often the way the church has responded has been negative and harmful. The Living in Love and Faith, the LLF project, also hasn't been about people. It's been with people. And that's probably the biggest change in our working methods. In 2017, a paper was brought to the General Synod, which the Synod rejected. And rather than bring yet another series of small papers, we sat down and worked, as Sarah has already described, on a process which led to this book. I commend it very strongly to you. It's very light reading compared to what it might be. And in the process of producing this work, it started with a couple of years of deep theological thinking from people of all views and very different experiences of sexuality. It went on to 2 years in which the streams of thinking, which were biblical, philosophical, ethical, historical, and scientific about the psychological and biological sciences, in which those streams were mixed up and produced, in the end, this work. And within those streams, and when those who did this work were people who were lay and ordained, people who were gay and straight, people who fell in every single category. So it was done with people, not to them. And there's been a really deep listening. You'll find many stories in here. It's got lots of good stories about different people's experience. And that resulted in the book being published, discussions at the General Synod, and Sarah very kindly, in addition to her other duties, as Bishop of London with Ava, who's worked the whole way through, working for 2.5 years on what we did about it. So not just producing a resource, but saying, okay, how are we going to act on this? It's been the most extensive and in-depth effort of any major faith group in exploring these questions, and many other global churches are looking on this as a major resource. It's a very high quality resource. We've also broadened those who are involved in making the decision. Historically, when I first became bishop 10 years ago, everything was done by the senior bishops, and everyone else was told what had been decided. And they did agree with it, didn't they? And it's now, this last discussion over the last 2.5 years involved what's called the College of Bishops, which is every bishop. And on Tuesday, when we met at the Excel Centre, there were over 100 bishops in the room, and it was a gracious, passionate, robust, but immensely united discussion, which resulted in an overwhelming majority for the direction in which we're going at the moment. It's the first time the entire college has been involved historically ever in making these kinds of decisions. And it's brought us together, as Sarah said, and Ava, huge honesty, transparency, and friendship and love. And I hope and pray that as we go from here to the General Synod next month, that the vast majority of voices will have that similar concern for each other. As it happened, I had a meeting last night with about 50 people from all shades of opinion within the church, and we were discussing this at some length. It was a supper, and everyone was listening carefully to each other. It wasn't a single discussion. Everybody was talking, and the mood was extraordinarily positive. This is a moment of joy and celebration. We have actually made decisions, and they are decisions which change our approach to LGBTQI+ people. We also say in these papers and the press release in particular that we're divided. And there's no point in pretending otherwise. The Church of England and the Anglican Communion are very divided. Those of you who followed the Lambeth Conference in July, August, will remember that. And that brings me to my own position on this. The Anglican Communion is a communion, not a single church. It's 43 churches around the world in 165 countries with over 2,000 languages and cultures. We scarcely agree on anything in daily life and experience, apart from that God in his love and grace came as fully human without losing any of being God in order to reach out to every human being, whatever their sexuality or color or race or gender or capacity or incapacity, to reach out to them and to draw them into the experience of God's love. That's the message of the church, and to live in communities that reflect that love and that difference. When a communion has people who range from someone I met a few years back whose grandfather in the hills of Papua New Guinea was the first man of his ethnic group ever to see a wheel, through to people who have advanced PhDs from top universities in the United States and work on Wall Street. You know, are we going to agree on everything? Dream on. Totally different life experiences. The Anglican Communion's miracle is not that it has differences, but that it loves one another despite them. That's extraordinary. It's a sign of God's grace and goodness. And my role as Archbishop of Canterbury is nowhere described as a human being, which may not surprise many people, but is described as an instrument of communion and a focus of unity. I have a pastoral responsibility for the whole communion. I've often prayed and will continue to pray with all sorts and kinds of people, with all sorts and kinds of problems, including many people who came looking for the experience of God's love, who were gay or who were straight or who had trouble with their marriage or were worried about their relationships. And I'll continue to pray for all those who come seeking prayer, and to pray with love and a deep sense that most clergy have of the privilege of being allowed into these sacred parts of people's lives. But because of my pastoral care and responsibility in being a focus of unity for the whole communion, I will, while being extremely joyfully celebratory of these new resources, I will not personally use them in order not to compromise that pastoral care, for example, which will need to be exercised next week when the Pope and the moderator of the Church of Scotland and I go on a pilgrimage of peace to the South Sudan, where 500,000 people have died from civil war in the last 9 years. And that is a self-denying ordinance, but it comes out of the global responsibility. So in summary, it's a long journey. I'm sure the last word hasn't been said, and I'm sure the discussions will continue. But this is an enormously important point, not only within the Anglican Communion and the Church of England, but also across the global church, in which we seek to recognize and to celebrate the love that all people have for one another, regardless of who they are and where they're from. And I am filled with joy about that. And last night, with all those differences, people shared their views and their feelings, which were almost all positive, with great joy that we'd taken this step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Justin. I'm now going to call on Archbishop Stephen for his own personal reflections, and to let you know that then Ava will be circling back with a practical explanation of what will be happening at Synod and how these materials are going to be socialized and approved. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it may be a long journey, but you're almost on the last lap of the presentations, and you'll get a chance to ask questions. And I thought I'd just start by saying, since Tuesday, I spoke with a priest yesterday, day before, in the York Diocese where I serve, and she said when I not so much heard the news, when I digested the news, when I kind of understood what's really being offered here, she said I wept. And I said I wasn't quite sure how to interpret her tears. I thought, is it because you're so distressed by what has happened or what hasn't happened? And she said, no. She said, but could I just check out, does it mean that if there's a same-sex couple in my parish who get married, does it mean I can invite them to church, that we can acknowledge? I said, yeah, that's what it means. So they were tears of joy. Now, I know that's not where everybody is. But I think I want to emphasize this does put the Church of England in a new place. And I believe it's a good place. And it's a good place because it holds the unity of the church, but it also enables LGBTQI plus people to be part of that church and have their lived experience, their love for each other acknowledged in the church. And I'm really sorry. One thing we've learnt in this process is just how much damage we've done. I don't think we didn't mean to do it. Nobody gets up in the morning saying they want to hurt and damage people, but we have. We have. And I also know that saying sorry doesn't cut it for some people. It sounds hollow. It's all very well you saying sorry. The church still isn't giving us what we want. That is how some people are responding. And I want to say, yeah, I do get that, but it doesn't mean the sorry isn't still heartfelt. And also the sorry now is coming from a place of being informed. You know, we've spent so much time listening and working with people across a whole range of diversities. It has brought us to a new knowledge and a new place of humility before God, before church, before the world, where we can say, yes, we got it wrong. And we're not saying, by the way, we think we've got it right now, but we are saying this is a good place to be, where we can live together with our disagreements and fully acknowledge and welcome into the church LGBTQI plus people. And the other thing I want to say sorry for is, you know, I'm not getting at the journalists. We love you as well, but we're really sorry the news leaked. We're really sorry the news leaked, because it meant that the people who would be hurt most by the news, those who are most vulnerable, heard the story not in the way that we want to tell the story. And we're really sorry that happened. So let me finish with a story which perhaps helps make sense of the change that's happening because of what we're announcing today. So I have a dear friend, one of my dearest, oldest, closest friends. He died 2 years ago in the opening months of the COVID thing. He was a priest. He was in a long-term, lifelong, stable, committed relationship with another priest that they met at theological college, and they were in a lifelong partnership. When civil partnership came in 15, 20 years ago, whenever that came in, they entered into a civil partnership, faithfully following the rules and disciplines of the church, and entered into a civil partnership. They invited me to the civil partnership ceremony. These are some of my closest friends. I was delighted to go. Rather naughtily, they tried to smuggle into the service a reading from the Bible, which, as you may know, in the civil partnership legislation, no prayers, no readings from the Bible were allowed. They tried to smuggle one in. They chose that passage from the Song of Songs, beautiful passage. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. And I kind of hope, because it didn't specifically mention God or Jesus, the civil celebrant wouldn't notice it was from the Bible. Civil celebrant did notice it was from the Bible. There's a whole little bit of wrangling going on before the ceremony began. They had to remove it. And I sat there, you know, and I was heartbroken that here these people who love each other, whose relationship so exhibits all that I would want and expect from a relationship, who taught me so much about love and sacrifice, and they couldn't even have this little reading from the Bible. And much of that was down to us in the church because of what we'd asked the government to do, and there was a great party afterwards, and the party was in the garden of the church where one of them was the minister. So we're standing in the garden of the church. There's the church. We're celebrating their marriage in the garden. We couldn't go into the church. We couldn't even go into the church and say a prayer. Don't misunderstand what's happening today. All that changes. And I'm really pleased it's changing. I'm really pleased it's changing. For my, gay friends, I'm really pleased. And no, it's not enough for some. And I'm really sorry it's not enough. And I wasn't expecting to get emotional. But I am. Because I think it puts the Church of England in a better place. And I really hope that we can hold together our unity. And I cry out for those who hate what we're doing and say, we want to hold you together in this. But this is the fullest pastoral provision that we can offer at the moment without changing legislation, which would take years anyway, years and years. We can offer this soon. and I thank God for it, and I hope it will be well received in our church and in our world.
Thank you. Thank you, Archbishop Stephen.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that.
What I'd like to do now, just before we go to questions, is just to call back Ava to talk through what's going to be happening at Synod over those 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and I'll be really quick. I imagine you're waiting to ask questions. So what's happening at Synod, given that actually officially these are things that bishops can already do, go ahead and do, but actually the bishops decided that it's really important to gauge the mind of Synod, to listen to what Synod members are thinking about these matters and how they're responding to the bishop's proposed way forward. So there's going to be events on each of the first 3 days of Synod relating to living in love and faith. On day 1, on Monday, there will be a shortish presentation just to kind of set the scene, explain how the bishops have come to the decisions that they have made and the plans that they are putting forward for future work. Then on day 2, Synod members will be invited to do some group work. They will gather in groups and reflect, first of all, on what Archbishop Justin was just talking about how do we engage with one another well when we disagree and when we're talking about things that are so deeply personal. So they'll spend a bit of time doing that because they can use the pastoral principles that were developed as part of the Living in Love and Faith process to think about what sometimes gets in the way of our relationships and of relating well across difference. They'll spend a little bit of time doing that, and then having done that, they will look at the prayers of love and faith, they'll look at the proposal for new pastoral guidance, and they will share their reflections on that. And importantly, those reflections will be gathered up and fed back in a plenary session at the end of the day. Important to say that doing group work can be difficult when we're talking about matters like this. So we've made sure that there are external facilitators for each group. We've made sure that there are clear ground rules so that the groups can hopefully have a really fruitful and productive conversation together. And then importantly, at the end of the day, gathering up the feedback from those groups, because bishops really want to hear what it is that Synod members are thinking. Then on the 3rd day, there will be a more traditional debate. And the bishops have put forward a multi-pronged motion. And Synod will have up to 5 hours, if you can imagine that, to debate the motion. And the motion invites Synod to join in apologising on behalf of the Church to LGBTQI+ people. It invites Synod to embed those pastoral principles that I just mentioned as a means of learning how to live well together across our differences. It invites Synod members to commit to continuing to learn together in the way that the Living in Love and Faith process has tried to embody. It will invite Synod members to welcome the bishop's commendation of prayers of love and faith when they are finalized. These are just draft. And finally, they will invite Synod members to consider having a period of about 5 years to just follow how have they been used and what can we learn, and then review after a period of 5 years. So 3 different things happening on 3 sequential days in Synod to really hopefully give Synod members every opportunity to share their own reflections to the Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ava. I'd now like to open the floor for questions. Our colleagues Kimberly and Fabian have 2 roving mics to ensure that those watching online and recording can pick up your question. Please do wait until the mics get to you before speaking. And also, can I just, as a formality, could you state your name and publication? Thank you. Harriet, yes.
Harriet Show at The Guardian. Archbishop Justin has been commendably clear on the fact that he will not offer blessings himself personally, and has been very clear about the reasons for that. Archbishop Stephen, you haven't said whether you will. Could you clarify that, please?
I mean, yes, I will. I mean, I completely support and understand Archbishop Justin's position, but his position is different to mine. that's what I imagine will happen. This is all still to go through, but yes.
Kaya, hello. Hi.
Hello. Obviously, the teaching that marriage and holy Kaya Burgess from the Times newspaper, with the teaching that holy matrimony remains between a man and a woman, and the teaching has always been that, on a dual sense, that gay people should remain celibate and that sex should take place within marriage. What is the position for the church now? Gay Christians have been asking, we can come to church now, have a civil marriage, come to church and have that relationship blessed. Are we still expected by the church to remain celibate? Or is it now understood if the marriage is blessed, sex should take place within marriage, that gay couples are allowed to express themselves sexually as well?
I think thank you for your question, and I recognise it's a question that many are proposing. I think that what we recognise that within the College of Bishops there will be a range of views that are held on that. What we are doing is proposing prayers for people at a stage of their relationship, and within that relationship, and we're specifically saying it is a faithful, lifelong relationship between two people, is that and I think one thing I have learned through listening is that there are a whole range of ways in which people will express that relationship, and some will be sexual, some will not, some will be friendship. Some will be sexual, and so the prayers are there that can be offered, and I think that the way they will be used is there will be a range of ways in which they will be used in that. So there will be the opportunity for those people in a same-sex relationship to come and have that relationship blessed, and of course some of those will be sexual.
Thank you, Harry.
Harry Farley from BBC News. You mentioned there was a range of views in the House of Bishops on that question. Perhaps Archbishop Stephen and Bishop Sarah, could I just ask for your personal views? Do you think that gay sex in the context of a loving, committed, lifelong relationship is a sin?
I think as Bishop Sarah's just said, if people who have, as I imagine this going forward, if people who have entered into a same-sex civil marriage come to the church seeking one of these services of love and faith, in the same way that actually with heterosexual couples, who come seeking holy matrimony, and one notices they have the same address, for instance, when they fill in the forms, I don't ask them questions about. I celebrate the fact that they are wanting to commit themselves in a stable, loving relationship. I believe the great gift of sexual and physical intimacy to be cherished belongs in stable, loving, committed relationships, and therefore I will celebrate the fact that people are living that way and expressing their intimacy that way.
Thank you. Yes.
Tim Sigsworth, Press Association. Given the census figures on the decline of religious belief in this country the other month, what do you say to those who would say that this is a pretty desperate attempt to appear more relevant to secular society, while also, in a way, engaging with those who hold the orthodox position on human sexuality?
No way, just Bishop. Would I want that role? I think there's a lot that we need to learn from the data that we see, both about the declining in people identifying as religious, as well as where we've seen decline within the church. And I think that we have to take that seriously. Often I recognise that is patchy. There are some churches that are growing, and that would be true with it. The London Diocese holds its own, if not grows. I think that in London, I think that people may actually be they make a greater commitment now to be part of a church than they had previously. I see, I confirm huge numbers of people who want to make a decision to follow Jesus Christ. So actually, I think those figures we have to pay attention and look at. And also, I think that people tend to be spiritual, although not always belong. So there's a real data that I wouldn't underplay the need for us to reflect on them, but also to recognise where the church is in contact with people. This has been a process where we have been, as a church, listening to people's lived experience. We have been reading scripture. We have been very aware of our tradition. And in a sense, that is what we have been reflecting on, not necessarily the question of relevance to our society. That isn't. Of course, we are part of, there is a church in every single community. We are the established church. So therefore, part of our listening has been to those around us, but it's not about relevance. It has been about trying to discern what God is calling us to do. And I think we recognize that within the church, there is a diversity of view, as there is within the College of Bishops. And I think what we're saying is recognizing that diversity. This is our response that we are making to that living in love and faith. And I do think that one of the things for me about a first, there's always been difference in the College of Bishops, but this is a first in probably saying, well, actually there is a difference. And actually our response was overwhelmingly a majority to put this proposal. This is our response forward. And therefore we are saying that with our diversity, we are seeking to walk in unity, which it isn't about forcing it, but about saying, with the grace of God, we will continue to do that.
This is Kelly from Premier. If I'm understanding this correctly, you're saying that sexual intimacy, it's now apt for each couple to decide. Is that the case for gay priests as well? And what would you say to those who might argue that the role of the church is to have a clear doctrine on these issues and for its members to abide to it?
What I do realise is that a lot of the questions that are being put to us, not from journalists, but from individual, relate to questions that individual clergy will have. And I think one of the things that we heard very clearly was that in terms of our pastoral response to the LGBTQ people who are clergy, is that we have not done that well enough. And a lot of that discernment of vocation and where their role is has been shaped partially by issues in human sexuality, which was a book that was written, I think, probably 30 years ago. It wasn't written for that purpose. And so therefore, we have clearly heard that that is not acceptable to continue on using that book. So there will be pastoral guidance that will be put in place. And therefore, that the use of that book for that reason will stop when that happens. And I think one of my regrets is that I couldn't be sitting here today and saying these are the pastoral guidance, but that's not where we are. We would hope that certainly by the time the Synod met in July, that there would be clear pastoral guidance in place. And part of the opportunity at Synod is also in the group work to listen to people's reflections about where the areas in which we want to focus on those guidance.
What would you say to those who might argue that the church should have a clear doctrine on issues such as this, and that its church members should abide to it?
Sorry, clear doctrine on what, sorry?
On issues such as sexuality, gender, etc.
Yeah, well, we agree that there needs to be clarity, moral, ethical, doctrinal clarity. So we would agree. But obviously what we are framing here and what will be articulated more in the pastoral guidance is where those boundaries are and how we are going to live faithfully within them. But yes, that we do need to acknowledge there is a change today, is that we are acknowledging the goodness and faithfulness of same-sex civil marriages and civil partnerships within the life of the church, and that opens up a number of questions for us, which the pastoral guidance will, I don't suppose we'll answer all of them, but we will answer the really pressing ones.
Just to say, on this question of sexual intimacy in relation to marriage, and absolutely, although the canons of the Church of England don't say anything explicitly about that, it has been the teaching of the Church of England that marriage is the best place for sexual intimacy. And I think we do need to acknowledge that there is difference among the bishops and within the Church about that. Some people would say that that absolutely stands, that sexual intimacy is only good in a heterosexual marriage, holy matrimony, and whereas others would take a more generous stand. So it is something that we disagree about, but we're talking about it, and I think that is hugely helpful and healthy. One of the things that we point out in the pastoral principles is the danger of silence, and opening up this conversation is, I think, really important and really helpful.
Yes, you're next.
Sorry, Susie Leaf, freelance, but here asking questions for English Churchman and Christian Today. The Archbishop of Canterbury, you referred to the Lambeth Conference and the joy of that. Do you think that your self-denying ordinance, which is, I can see something that is going to, as it were, hurt, do you think that will be enough to keep the Anglican Communion together, considering what the Global South Fellowship said at Lambeth about not being able to walk together with those who bless same-sex relationships?
We've been, thank you, Susie. Is it all right if I answer this one? You're in charge. The Lambeth Conference was an extraordinary moment because on the Tuesday of the Lambeth Conference, the first Tuesday, we discussed this at some length, knowing how deeply divided we were, and knowing that there were very extensive groups outside the hall and outside the bishops who were using all kinds of really quite unpleasant methods to try and get people to split and divide, offering money and things. So it was a really remarkable moment. The afternoon ended with people of entirely opposite views embracing each other and spending the rest of that week in united prayer and agreement. It was a very remarkable thing. We've been quite clear, and we were quite clear on that Tuesday, that there are widely different views, that the vast majority of the Anglican Communion hold to the traditional view. And since that point, I have been regularly in contact with the primates of the Anglican Communion in the 42 other provinces and visiting a number of them, not to talk about this, but talking about it in the course of the visit. And we had a special primates meeting just before Christmas. And I've been in touch just before the press release was issued on the day before yesterday, I think it was. And the response has been predictable, but muted and generous. I can't predict the future. I don't know what the response will be to my self-denying ordinance. I'm not doing it in order to hold the community together. I'm doing it because I think it's right. And I'd add that to what Sarah and Stephen said. No, this is not a desperate effort to reverse the decline of the Church of England. That didn't come up in the discussions. We did it, not out of expedience, because we think it's right. And I would add, in the way that when you see the prayers, in the way they're written and thought about, that they fall very clearly within, to lapse into technical language, what is described as Lambeth Resolution Lambeth 1.10, 1998 of the 1998 Lambeth Conference of Bishops, Resolution 110 as it's called, which has about 6 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs, I can never quite remember. And there's one which you mentioned, which says we can't bless same-sex marriages. And this seeks to bless the people and that's really important. And there are other paragraphs that say we cannot exhibit homophobia. Very, very clearly, that bit is usually forgotten and very often ignored. And I've had some very public disagreements with primates of the Global South who've ignored the latter part as well as the former part. So will it hold? I don't know. I don't know. I'm hopeful. I pray it will, because I believe that it is emphatically Jesus' prayer and command that the church holds together through its disagreements. And failure to do that is to go straight against the prayer and command of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Thank you. And we have 5 more minutes left for questions, Harriet. Yes?
If the church is going to offer blessings to people who've undergone a civil marriage, where does that leave clergy who have undergone civil marriages but have then been barred from ministry as a result?
That is explicitly the question that the pastoral guidance will address. So I think our aim is to produce, so the pastoral guidance will not be a book that goes on a shelf. The pastoral guidance will be ongoing guidance, recognising that there'll be a need as the world changes. So we will expedite very quickly those that relate to the most pressing issues. And so for me to say that, I said before, those are the sort of guidance that will absolutely, I hope anyway, I have every intention that they are in place well before the July Synod.
Thank you.
Thanks. Eleanor, ITV News. Archbishop, ITV News, National. Yeah, that's all good. Can you hear me now? A couple of things. How can the church offer God's blessing to something which, because of doctrine, it does say it can't recognise or accept? And what would you say to couples who think that it's pointless to look for a blessing from a church that doesn't actually really want to marry them?
I think I want to start with the second one, because I actually think, I think that what is already said, this has been a significant change here, and that for the church to be able to offer prayers of blessings, that somebody who wants their partnership blessed in church, this is, it will be possible. But of course, we've also said they are voluntary. And therefore, it may well be that not every church will offer them, but that is still the position around the marriage of those that are divorced in church. That not every church offers that, and therefore, I think that if a couple were to approach a church that were not offering the prayers, in the same ways that happens now, that they would be generously welcomed and actually helped along the way to find the church nearest them that could offer it. And I think also, going back to a point that Eva made, that my expectation is that this is a couple that also want to celebrate it specifically. They want God's blessing on them. It's about celebrating their relationship, faithful relationship, recognizing that they want to do that with God involved. And therefore, I sort of hope that these are couples that are also involved in the local church. They already have a relationship with the church. And I think that is the real opportunity. So I think, therefore, I would hope that they would explore that conversation, because this will be the first time that they will be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Francis Martin from the Church Times. At the start of this week, MPs from across the political spectrum publicly expressed their hope that the Church of England would endorse same-sex marriage. And many of them added that the established status of the Church could be up for discussion if the Church did not do so. Do you think that what has been announced today will placate those MPs? or is that an ongoing concern? I'd be interested in your reflections perhaps on the discussions, informal behind closed doors perhaps, that have been ongoing with parliamentarians.
Obviously, can't discuss questions behind closed doors because they were behind closed doors.
And I don't think we know about them.
Yes, I'm not aware of them. So, you know more than we do, which is often the case here. Yeah. I think it's a question for Parliament. I think you have to ask them. I can't, and we're in constant touch with parliamentarians with all sorts of views. I just don't know I don't think I've got a valuable answer to them. It's not intended to placate them. That had no influence at all. This is not an expedient point. It is a point that we felt was right. And I remember, like Stephen, it just came, his face and name came to my mind just as you were asking the question, of someone who was a very strong member of the church where I was many years ago, very many years ago, where I was parish priest. And or one of the parish priests there. And he was single. And I suppose some years after I left, when he came out as gay, it wasn't a huge surprise. But the next thing I heard was that the pressure of living with the church's attitude had led to his suicide. I still mourn him. And I wish he was here today, because I think he would be able to feel that perhaps it wasn't everything he wanted, but it said that he wasn't a lesser. What we've done and are doing and will go on doing says he's not lesser, he's not excluded, he's not unloved, he's not unwanted, but he's as much a valuable, loved, saved member of God's people, because he's put his trust and life in the hands of Jesus Christ, as any other person who has done that. So I'm, in a sense, like Stephen, I'm really pleased that we've done what we've done. And I just wish that certain people could be here today and know about it.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are out of time. The two archbishops need to be somewhere else very shortly. So I would like to thank you very, very much for coming. We will see many of you at Synod. I know that some of you have arranged some one-on-one interviews. John's going to come up now and just talk about the logistics of that. But a very warm thanks from all of us for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you at Synod as well. Thank you.